Section 12 of Lives of the Queens of England, Volume 6, by Agnes and Elisabeth Strickland. This recording is in the public domain. Elisabeth, Chapter 4, Part 3. During the whole of Lent the Queen had kept the fast, heard sermons regularly, and apparelled herself in black, but the happy restoration of peace caused the Easter festival to be observed with unusual rejoicings. On St. George's Day the Queen went about the hall and all the Knights of the Garter singing in procession. The same day in the afternoon were 4 knights elected, namely, the Duke of Norfolk, the Marquis of Northampton, the Earl of Rutland, and the Lord Robert Dudley, Master of the Queen's Horse. The following lines from a contemporary poet may not be displeasing to the reader. I saw a virgin queen, attired in white, leading with her a sort of goodly knights, with garters and with collars of St. George. Elisabeth, on a compartiment of bice, in gold, was writ and hung askew upon her head, under a royal crown. She was the sovereign of the knights she led. Her face methink I knew, as if the same great empress that we now enjoy, had climbed the clouds, and been in person there, to whom the earth, the sea, and elements auspicious are. When Elisabeth came to the throne, she found herself in a novel position as regarded the Order of the Garter, for her brother-in-law, Philip of Spain, had, in consequence of his marriage with her late sister, Queen Mary, been constituted, by the authority of Parliament, joint sovereign of the order with his royal consort. Elisabeth, having no wish to hold any dignity in partnership with him, yet desiring to do all things with proper courtesy, caused his banner to be removed to the second stall on the prince's side, intimating that he continued a knight companion of the order, though he had, by the death of the queen his wife, lost the joint sovereignty. Philip, however, returned the garter by the hands of the queen's ambassador, Lord Montague, who had been sent to negotiate a peace. But Elisabeth did not accept his resignation, and he continued a companion of the order till his death, notwithstanding the hostile character of his subsequent proceedings towards England. Elisabeth's first chapter of the order was certainly held in St. George's Hall at Greenwich, for we find that the same afternoon she went to Baynard's Castle, the Earl of Pembroke's place, and supped with him, and after supper she took boat and was rowed up and down on the river Thames, hundreds of boats and barges rowing about her, and thousands of people thronging the banks of the river to look upon her majesty, rejoicing to see her, and partaking of the music and sights on the Thames. It seems there was an aquatic festival in honour of the welcome appearance of their new and comely liege lady on the river, for the trumpets blew, drums beat, flutes played, guns were discharged, and fireworks played off as she moved from place to place. This continued till 10 o'clock at night, when the queen departed home. By thus showing herself so freely and condescendingly to her people, she made herself dear and acceptable unto them. Well indeed had nature qualified Elisabeth to play her part with éclat in the imposing drama of royalty, by the endowments of wit, eloquence, penetration, and self-possession, joined to the advantages of commanding features and a majestic presence. She had, from childhood upwards, studied the art of courting popularity, and perfectly understood how to please the great body of the people. The honest-hearted mechanical classes, won by the frank manner in which she dispensed the cheap but dearly prized favours of gracious words and smiles, regarded her with feelings approaching to idolatry, and as for the younger nobles and gentlemen of England who attended her court, they were, almost to a man, eager for the opportunity of risking their lives in her service, and she knew how to improve the love and loyalty of all ranks of her subjects to the advancement of her power and the defence of her realm. The pecuniary aids granted by her first parliament to Queen Elizabeth, though only proportioned to the extreme necessity of the crown at that period, were enormous, for, besides the tenths, first fruits, and impropriations of church property, which had been declined by Mary, and the grant of tonnage and poundage for life, they voted a subsidy of 2 8d. in the pound on all movable goods, and 4 shillings on land, to be paid in 2 several payments. How such a property tax was ever gathered after a year of famine and pestilence must indeed appear a marvel to those who witnessed the irritation and inconvenience caused to the needy portion of the middle classes by the infliction of a comparatively trivial impost at present. It is always easy to convince the wealthy of the expediency of sacrificing a part to save the whole. Therefore Elisabeth and her acute premier, Cecil, laid a heavier burden on the lords of the soil and those who derived their living from ecclesiastical property than on those whose possessions were limited to personals, which at that time were chiefly the mercantile and mechanical classes. The destitution of the crown having been thus relieved, a series of pageants and festivities were wisely ordained by the queen, as a sure means of diverting the attention of the good people of London and its neighbourhood from past troubles and present changes. Stowe gives a quaint account of her majesty coming, in great state, to St. Mary's Spital, to hear a sermon delivered from the cross, on which occasion she was attended by 1000 men in harness, with shirts of mail, pikes, and field pieces, with drums and trumpets sounding. The procession was closed by Morris dancers and 2 white bears in a cart. These luckless animals were, of course, to furnish a cruel pageant for the recreation of the queen and her loving citizens after the sermon was ended. In a letter of the 14th of April, that eminent reformer, Jewel, laments that the queen continued the celebration of mass in her private chapel. It was not till the 12th of May that the service was changed and the use of Latin discontinued. The queen, observes Jewel, declines being styled the head of the church, at which I certainly am not much displeased. Elisabeth assumed the title of governess of the church, but she finally asserted her supremacy in a scarcely less authoritative manner than her father had done, and many Catholics were put to death for denying it. Touching the suitors of Elisabeth's hand, Jewel tells his Zurich correspondent that nothing is yet talked about the queen's marriage, yet there are now courting her the King of Sweden, the Saxon, son of John Frederick, Duke of Saxony, and Charles, the son of the Emperor Ferdinand, to say nothing of the Englishman, Sir William Pickering. I know, however, what I should prefer, but matters of this kind, as you are aware, are rather mysterious, and we have a common proverb, that marriages are made in heaven. In another letter, dated May 22, 1559, he says, that public opinion inclines towards Sir William Pickering, a wise and religious man, and highly gifted as to personal qualities. Jewel is the first person who mentions Pickering among the aspirants for the hand of Queen Elizabeth. He had been employed on diplomatic missions to Germany and France, with some credit to himself, and the queen bestowed so many marks of attention upon him, that the Spanish ambassador, as well as our good bishop and others, fancied that he had as fair a chance of success as the sons of reigning princes. He is also mentioned by Camden as a gentleman of moderate fortune, but comely person. It is possible that Pickering had performed some secret service for Elizabeth in the season of her distress, which entitled him to the delusive honour of her smiles, as there is undoubtedly some mystery in the circumstance of a man scarcely of equestrian rank, encouraging hopes so much above his condition. Be this as it may, he quickly vanished from the scene, and was forgotten. On the 23rd of May, a splendid embassy from France, headed by the Duc de Montmorency, arrived, for the purpose of receiving the queen's ratification of the Treaty of Cambresses. They landed at the Tower Wharf, and were conducted to the Bishop of London's palace, where they were lodged. On the following day, they were brought in great state by a deputation of the principal nobles of the court, through Fleet Street, to a supper banquet with the queen, at her palace at Westminster, where they were entertained with sumptuous cheer and music till after midnight. On the following day they came gorgeously apparelled to dine with her majesty, and were recreated afterwards with the baiting of bears and bulls. The queen's grace herself and the ambassadors stood in the gallery, looking on the pastime, till 6 in the evening. On the 26th, another bull and bear baiting was provided, for the amusement of the noble envoys at Paris Garden, and on the 28th, when they departed, they were presented with many mastiffs, for the nobler purpose of hunting their wolves. On the 11th of June, at 8 o'clock at night, the queen and her court embarked in their barges at Whitehall, and took their pleasure on the river, by rowing along the bank, and crossing over to the other side, with drums beating and trumpets sounding, and so to Whitehall again. The Londoners were so lovingly disposed to their maiden sovereign, that when she withdrew to her summer bowers at Greenwich, they were fain to devise all sorts of gallant shows, to furnish excuses for following her there, to enjoy, from time to time, the sunshine of her presence. They prepared a sort of civic tournament in honour of her majesty, July 2nd, each company supplying a certain number of men at arms, 1400 in all clad in velvet and chains of gold, with guns, Morris pikes, halberds, and flags, and so marched they over London Bridge, into the Duke of Suffolk's park at Southwark, where they mustered before the Lord Mayor, and in order to initiate themselves into the hardships of a campaign, they lay abroad in St. George's Field all that night. The next morning they set forward in a goodly array, and entered Greenwich Park at an early hour, where they reposed themselves to 8 o'clock, and then marched down into the lawn, and mustered in their arms, all the gunners being in shirts of mail. It was not, however, till eventide that her majesty deigned to make herself visible to the doughty bands of Cockaigne. Chivalry they cannot properly be called, for they had discreetly avoided exposing civic horsemanship to the mockery of the gallant equestrians of the court, and trusted no other legs than their own, with the weight of their valour and warlike accoutrements, in addition to their velvet gabardines and chains of gold, in which this midsummer bevy had bivouacked in St. George's Field on the preceding night. At 5 o'clock the queen came into the gallery of Greenwich Park Gate, with the ambassadors, lords, and ladies, a fair and numerous company. Then the Lord Marquis of Northampton, Queen Catharine Parr's brother, whom, like Edward VI, Elisabeth ever treated as an uncle, her great uncle, Lord William Howard, Lord Admiral of England, and Lord Robert Dudley, her master of the horse, undertook to review the city muster, and to set their battles in array, to skirmish before the queen, with flourish of trumpets, alarum of drums, and melody of flutes, to encourage the counter champions to the fray. 3 onsets were given, the guns discharged on one another, the Moorish pikes encountered together with great alarm, each ran to his weapon again, and then they fell together as fast as they could, in imitation of close fight, while the queen and her ladies looked on. After all this, Mr. Chamberlain, and divers of the commons of the city, and whifflers, came before her grace, who thanked them heartily, and all the city, whereupon was given the greatest shout ever heard, with hurling up of caps, and the queen showed herself very merry. After this was a running at tilt, and lastly all departed home to London. As numerous, if not as valiantly disposed a company, poured down from the metropolis to Woolwich on the morrow, for on that day, July 3rd, the queen went in state to witness the launch of a fine new ship of war, which in her honour was called the Elisabeth. The gallantry of the city muster inspired the gentlemen of the court with loyal emulation, and they determined to tilt on foot, with spears before the queen, also in Greenwich Park. The challengers were 3, the Earl of Ormond, Sir John Perrot, and Mr. North, and there were defendants of equal prowess with lances and swords. The whole of the queen's band of pensioners were, however, to run with spears, and preparations were made for a royal and military feat champêtre, such as might be imitated with admirable effect in Windsor Park even now. It was both the policy and pleasure of the last of the Tudor sovereigns to keep her loving metropolis in good humour, by allowing the people to participate, as far at least as looking on went, in her princely recreation. Half the popularity of Elisabeth proceeded from the care she took that the holidays of her subjects should be merry days. If ever any person had either the gift or the style to win the hearts of the people, says Hayward, it was this queen. But to return to her July evening pageant in the green glades of Greenwich Park. A goodly banqueting house was built up for her grace with fir poles, and decked with birch branches and all manner of flowers, both of the field and garden, as roses, July flowers, lavender, marigolds, and all manner of strewing herbs and rushes. There were also tents set up for providing refreshments, and a space made for the tilting. About 5 in the afternoon came the queen, with the ambassadors and the lords and ladies of her train, and stood over the park gate, to see the exercise of arms, and afterwards the combatants chasing one another. Then the queen took her horse, and accompanied by 3 ambassadors and her retinue, rode to the Sylvan Pavilion, where a costly banquet was provided for her. This was succeeded by a masque, and the entertainment closed, with fireworks and firing of guns, about midnight. But while Elizabeth appeared to enter into these gay scenes of festive pageantry, with all the zest of a young, sprightly, and handsome woman, who, emerging suddenly from restraint, retirement, and neglect, finds herself the delight of every eye and the idol of all hearts, her mind was intent on matters of high import, and she knew that the flowers, with which her path was strewn, concealed many a dangerous quicksand from those who looked not below the surface. Within 1 little month of the solemn ratification of the Treaty of Chateau Cambresis by the plenipotentiaries of France in her court, her right to the crown she wore had been boldly impugned by Henry II's principal minister of state, the Constable de Montmorency, who, when the Duc de Nemours, a prince nearly allied to the throne of France, informed him of his intention of seeking the Queen of England in marriage, exclaimed, "Do you not know that the Queen Dolphin has right and title to England?" A public demonstration of this claim was made, at the jousts in honour of the espousals of the French king's sister with the Duke of Savoy, Elizabeth's oft-rejected suitor, when the Scotch heralds displayed the escutcheon of their royal mistress, the Queen of Scots quartered, with those of France and England, which was afterwards protested against by the English ambassador, Throckmorton. It was retorted that Elizabeth had assumed the title of Queen of France at her coronation, a pretension too absurd, as the operation of the Salic law had always incapacitated females from inheriting the sceptre of that realm, even when born, as in the case of the daughter of Louis Hutin, sole issue of a reigning monarch, representing the ancient royal line of France. Calais, the last relic of the conquests of Edward III. And Henry V., was now in the hands of the French government, and although Henry II. Had virtually acknowledged the right of Elizabeth to that town, by binding himself to restore it at the end of 8 years, and a chimerical proposition had also been made to settle all disputes for its possession, by both claimants ceding it, as a marriage portion, to an imaginary firstborn son of Elizabeth and daughter of Mary Stuart by Francis of Valois, or otherwise to the son of Mary and daughter of Elizabeth, it was mere temporizing diplomacy. The mighty plan of uniting the Gallic and Britannic empires beneath the sceptres of Francis of Valois and Mary of Scotland had never ceased to occupy the attention of Henry II. From the death of Edward VI. Till his own course was suddenly cut short by the accidental wound he had received from a splinter of his opponent's lance, while tilting in honour of his daughter's nuptials. That event produced an important change in the fortunes of England's Elizabeth. She was at once delivered from the most dangerous and insidious of her foes, and the consequences of the formidable alliance between France and Spain. For although the rival claims of his consort to the throne of England were asserted by Francis II., he was a sickly youth, inheriting neither the talents nor the judgment of his father. The nominal power of France and Scotland both passed into the hands of Mary Stuart's uncles, the princes of Lorraine and Guise, but the rival factions, both political and religious, by which they were opposed and impeded on every side, deprived them of the means of injuring Elizabeth, who, on her part, actively employed agents, as numerous as the arms of Briareus, in sowing the seeds of discord, and nursing every root of bitterness that sprang up in those unhappy realms. The fulminations of John Knox against female government had incited the reform party to resist the authority of the queen dowager Mary of Lorraine, to whom the regent Arran had in 1555 reluctantly resigned his office. The queen regent, after an ill-judged, fruitless struggle to crush the progress of the Reformation, summoned the Earl of Arran, who had recently accepted the French dukedom of Châtel-Herault, to her aid as the most powerful peer in Scotland and the next in succession to the throne, on which, in fact, he had, from the first, cast a longing regard. He was the head of the potent house of Hamilton, but his designs had been checked by the rival faction of the Earl of Lennox, and subsequently by the more popular and able party of the young queen's illegitimate brother, the Earl of Murray. And now, although he gave his lukewarm succour to the queen regent in her need, he suffered himself to be deluded by the English cabinet, with the idea that the crown might be transferred from the brows of his absentee sovereign to his own, or rather to those of his heir, the Earl of Arran, to whom Queen Elizabeth had been offered in her childhood by her father, Henry VIII. There is every reason to believe that Cecil seriously meditated uniting the island crowns by a marriage between his royal mistress and young Arran, if the Hamilton party in Scotland had succeeded in deposing Queen Mary and placing him on the throne. The young earl, who had been colonel of the Scotch Guards at Paris, had, in anticipation of a more brilliant destiny, embraced the reformed religion, and, as it is supposed, at the suggestion and with the aid of Throckmorton, Elizabeth's ambassador at Paris, absconded from the French service, and after visiting Geneva to arrange his plans with the leaders of that church, he came privately to England. The secret and confidential conference which he held with Queen Elizabeth on the 6th of August must have taken place at the ancient palace of Eltham, where she arrived on the preceding day. Arran was young and handsome, but weak-minded; at times, indeed, subject to the dire malady which clouded the mental perceptions of his father and brothers, just the subject for the royal coquette and her wily premier to render a ready tool in any scheme connected with hopes of aggrandizement for himself. As the plan and limits of this work will not admit of launching into the broad stream of general history the events of the Scotch campaign, which commenced with Elizabeth sending an army and a fleet to aid the insurgent lords of the congregation in defending themselves against the French forces, called in by the queen regent, and ended by giving her a predominant power in the councils of that distracted realm, cannot be detailed here. The manuscripts in the State Paper Office attest the fact that the Lord James, Mary's illegitimate brother, afterwards so celebrated as the Regent Murray, and the principal leaders of the popular party, were the pensioners of Elizabeth. The Treaty of Edinburgh was framed according to her interest, and proved, of course, unsatisfactory to the Queen of Scots and her consort. "I will tell you freely," said Mary's uncle, the Cardinal of Lorraine, to the English ambassador, Throckmorton, "the Scots do perform no part of their duties. The king and queen have the names of their sovereigns, and your mistress hath the effect and obedience." The Congregational Parliament had dispatched a solemn embassy to Elizabeth, consisting of Lethington and the Earls of Morton and Glencairn, to entreat her to join in marriage with the Earl of Arran. The Cardinal Lorraine, in allusion to the errand of these nobles, said to Throckmorton, "This great legation goeth for the marriage of your queen with the Earl of Arran. What shall she have with him? I think her heart too great to marry with such a one as he is, and one of the queen's subjects." It was not in Elizabeth's nature to return an immediate or direct answer in any matter of state policy, especially if involving a proposal of marriage. The unexpected death of the royal husband of the Queen of Scots probably hastened Elizabeth's decision with regard to her Scottish suitor, and she declined the offer in terms of courtesy, thanking the nobles at the same time for their goodwill, in offering her the choicest person they had. Arran immediately afterwards became, as doubtless Elizabeth was aware he would, the suitor of his own fair sovereign, the widowed Mary Stuart. It will now be necessary to return to the chronological order of the personal history of Elizabeth, which we have a little antedated in putting the reader in possession of the result of the Earl of Arran's courtship. The queen had many wooers in the interim, both among foreign princes and her subjects. Of these, Henry Fitzalan, Earl of Arundel, claims the first mention as the foremost in rank and consequence. He was the premier earl of England, and at that time there was but one peer of the ducal order, his son-in-law, Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk. As the last male of the illustrious house of Fitzalan, he boasted the blood of the Plantagenets, and of the ancient royal line of Charlemagne and St. Louis, and he was nearly allied in blood to the queen as a descendant of Woodville, Earl of Rivers. His possessions were proportioned at his high rank and proud descent. He had been materially instrumental in placing the crown on the head of the rightful heiress, Queen Mary, at the time of the brief usurpation of the hapless Lady Jane Grey, and, though his ardent loyalty to the late queen, and his zeal for the old religion, had induced him at first to take part against Elizabeth, at the time of the Wyatt rebellion, we have shown how soon his manly heart revolted in her favour, and that she was in all probability indebted to his powerful protection, for the preservation of her life from the malignant and lawless practices of Gardiner and his party. It is certain that he forfeited the favour of Mary by the boldness with which he afterwards stood forth in the court, the council, and the senate, as the advocate of the captive princess, and that he was employed in embassies to foreign courts, to keep him from dangerous enterprises at home. His only son, whom he had offered to contract to Elizabeth in marriage, in the time of her great adversity, was no more, and the stout earl, who had not exceeded his 47th year, recalling perchance some of the artful compliments to himself, with which the royal maid had declined to enter into an engagement with his heir, hastened home from Brussels on the death of her sister, and presented himself as a candidate for her hand. Of all the lovers of Elizabeth, his attachment was probably the most sincere, as it commenced in the season of persecution. He now, as Lord Steward of the royal household, enjoyed many opportunities of preferring his suit, and, albeit the maiden majesty of England had no intention of becoming the third wife of one of her subjects, old enough to be her father, she gave him sufficient encouragement to excite the jealousy of the other courtiers, if not to afford himself reasonable hopes of success. About the 8th of August, 1559, the queen honoured him with a visit at Nonsuch, one of the royal residences of which he appears to have obtained a lease from Queen Mary. Here, on the Sunday night, he entertained her majesty with a sumptuous banquet, and a masque accompanied with military music, till midnight. On Monday, a splendid supper was provided for the royal guest, who previously, from a stand erected for her in the further park, witnessed a course. At night, the children of St. Paul's School, under the direction of their music master, Sebastian, performed a play, which was succeeded by a costly banquet with music. The queen was served on richly gilded plate. The entertainment lasted till the unusual late hour of 3 in the morning, and the earl presented her majesty with a cupboard of plate, which was the first of those expensive offerings Elizabeth habitually accustomed herself to receive, and sometimes almost extorted from her nobles. By feeding the hopes of Arundel, Elizabeth obtained his vote and influence in the council and senate, whenever she had a point to carry, even with regard to the peaceful establishment of the Reformed Church. The royal weapon of coquetry was also exercised, though in a playful and gracious manner, towards her former cruel foe Paulet, Marquis of Winchester, the Lord Treasurer, by whom she was splendidly entertained at his house at Basing, soon after her accession to the throne. At her departure, her majesty merrily bemoaned herself that he was so old, "for else, by my troth," said she, "if my Lord Treasurer were but a young man, I would find it in my heart to have him for my husband before any man in England." When the announcement of the marriage of her former suitor, Philip II., with her fair namesake of France, was made to Elizabeth, she pretended to feel mortified, and complained to the ambassador of the inconstancy of his master, "who could not," she said, "wait 4 short months to see if she would change her mind." She always kept the portrait of this prince by her bedside, it has been said, as a token of regard, but the probability is, that she found it there when she took possession of the state apartments occupied by the late queen, her sister. The person, however, who held the most conspicuous place in her majesty's favour, and through whose hands the chief preferments and patronage of her government flowed, was Lord Robert Dudley, at that period a married man. He was born, in the same auspicious hour with the queen, with whom his destiny became inseparably connected from the time they were both prisoners in the Tower. From the first month of her accession to the throne, Elisabeth, so remarkable for her frugal distribution of rewards and honours, showered wealth and distinctions on him. She conferred the office of Master of Horse on him in the first instance, with the fee of 100 marks per annum and the lucrative employment of head commissioner for compounding the fines of such as were desirous of declining the order of knighthood, and he was soon after invested with the garter, and made constable of Windsor Castle and Forest, and keeper of the Great Park during life. His wife, Amy Robsart, a wealthy heiress, whom he had wedded with great pomp and publicity during the reign of Edward VI., was not allowed by him to appear among the noble matronage of Elizabeth's court, lest she should mar the sunshine of his favour, by reminding his royal mistress of the existence of so inconvenient a personage. Elizabeth's undisguised partiality for the handsome Dudley excited the jealousy of the other members of her council, and even the politic Cecil could not forbear hazarding a biting jest to Elizabeth on the subject, when he told her of the misalliance of her cousin Frances, Duchess of Suffolk, with her equerry, Adrian Stokes. "What!" exclaimed her majesty, "has she married her horse-keeper?" "Yea, madam," replied the premier, "and she says you would like to do the same with yours." Cecil's innuendo was undoubtedly meant to warn the queen that her intimacy with Dudley was likely to prove injurious to her reputation, and derogatory to the dignity of the crown. Sir Thomas Challoner, her majesty's representative at the court of Spain, had, in a private postscript to one of his dispatches, addressed the following intimation to the premier on this delicate subject: "I assure you, sir, these folks are broad-minded, where I spoke of one too much in favour, as they esteem. I think ye guess whom they named. If ye do not, I will, upon my next letter, write further. To tell you what I conceive, as I count the slander most false, so a young princess cannot be too wary, what countenance or familiar demonstration she maketh more to one than another. I grudge no man's service in the realm, worth the entertainment with such a tale of obloquy, or occasion of speech to such men of evil will are ready to find faults." Challoner goes on to express the vexation he, as an attached servant of the queen, feels at the impediment such reports are likely to cause in her majesty's marriage, to the detriment of her whole realm, ministering matter for lewd tongues to descant upon, and breeding contempt. All this, he states, is written in strict confidence to his friend Cecil, and entreats him to keep it to himself. He then alludes to an overture of marriage which had been made to the queen by the king of Spain, in behalf of his cousin, the Archduke Charles, the Emperor Ferdinand's second son, a prince of noble qualities and stainless reputation. He was a Catholic, and Elizabeth on that account, probably, or mistrusting the quarter whence the proposal came, had returned an evasive and unsatisfactory answer. Challoner evidently considered that the indifference of the queen proceeded from her predilection in favour of the person to whom he had just alluded, and appears anxious lest the honourable alliance should be lost. "Consider," says he, "how ye deal now in the emperor's matter, much dependeth on it. Here they hang in expectation, as men desirous it should go forward, but as yet they have small hope. In mine opinion, be it said to you only, the affinity is great and honourable, the amity necessary to stop and cool many enterprises. Ye need not fear his greatness should overrule you. He is not a Philip, but better for us than a Philip." The suit of this accomplished prince was afterwards preferred in due form to Elizabeth by Count Elphinstone, the emperor's ambassador, and she protested openly, that of all the illustrious marriages that had been offered to her, there was not one greater, or that she affected more than that of the Archduke Charles, and expressed a desire to see him in England. It was generally expected that the prince would come under an assumed character to visit the court of England, and obtain a first sight of his royal lady by stealth, but this chivalric project, well worthy of the poetic age, which gave birth to Spenser, Shakespeare, and Sir Philip Sidney, was never carried into effect. Their differences as to their jarring creeds, as Elizabeth demanded conformity to the Protestant form of worship, appeared insuperable, and for a time put an end to the negotiations, though they were subsequently renewed, as will be related in due course. Meantime, the suit of a royal candidate, of the reformed religion, for her hand was renewed by the King of Sweden in behalf of his heir, Prince Eric. The ambassador chosen to plead his cause was John, Duke of Finland, the second son of the Swedish monarch, a prince of singular talents and address, and possessed of great personal attractions. On the 27th of September, this distinguished envoy landed at Harwich, and on the 5th of October he was met and welcomed at Colchester, in the name of the Queen, by the Earl of Oxford and Lord Robert Dudley, by whom he was conducted to London. At the corner of Gracechurch Street, Reydon Hall, he was received by the Marquis of Northampton, Lord Ambrose Dudley, and a fair company of ladies, as well as gentlemen, in rich array, with the escort of 100 yeomen on horseback, with trumpets sounding. He proceeded over London Bridge to the Bishop of Winchester's palace, which was appointed for his abode, it being the custom, in the good old times, to quarter any foreigner of distinguished rank, and his train, on some wealthy noble or prelate, for board and entertainment. 7 days after, the Prince of Sweden came by water to the court, with his guard, and was honourably received by many noble personages at the hall door, where the guard stood, in their rich coats, in a line which extended to the presence chamber, where the Queen received him with the honours due to a royal visitor, and welcomed him with great cordiality. Whenever he went in state to court, he threw handfuls of money among the populace, saying, he gave silver, but his brother would give gold. The Swede, and Charles the son of the Emperor, observes Bishop Jewel, are courting at a most marvellous rate, but the Swede is most in earnest, for he promises mountains of silver in case of success. The lady, however, is probably thinking of an alliance nearer home. In November there were great jousts at the Queen's palace. The Lord Robert and Lord Hunsdon were the challengers, who wore scarves of white and black. The defendants were Lord Ambrose Dudley and others, wearing scarves of red and yellow sarcenet. On the last day of the merry year of 1559, a play was acted in court before the Queen, but we learn that the licence usually showed on such occasions being abused in this instance, they acted something so distasteful to her Majesty that they were commanded to break off, and were superseded by a masque and dancing. On the 1st of January, Prince John of Sweden came, gorgeously apparelled, to the court, to offer the New Year's greeting to her Majesty. His retinue wore velvet jerkins and rich gold chains. It was an equestrian procession, and his guards carried halberds in their hands. That day, her Majesty's silk woman, Mistress Montague, brought her for her New Year's gift a pair of knit black silk stockings. The Queen, after wearing them a few days, was so much pleased with them that she sent for Mistress Montague and asked her, from whence she had them, and if she could help her to any more? I made them very carefully on purpose only for your Majesty, said she, and seeing these please you so well, I will presently set more in hand. Do so, replied the Queen, for indeed I like silk stockings well, because they are pleasant, fine, and delicate, and henceforth I will wear no more cloth stockings. And from that time to her death, the Queen never more wore cloth hose, but only silk stockings. These knit silk stockings were imitations of some which had been previously sent from Spain, perhaps manufactured by the Moors. It may be observed that Elisabeth, on her accession to the throne, considering it no longer expedient to mortify her inordinate love of dress by conforming to the self-denying costume of the more rigid order of reformers, who then began to be known by the name of Puritans, passed from one extreme to the other, and indulged in a greater excess of finery and elaborate decoration than was ever paralleled by any other queen of England, regnant or consort. Horace Walpole, speaking of her portraits, observes, that there is not one that can be called beautiful. The profusion of ornaments with which they are loaded are marks of her continual fondness for dress, while they entirely exclude all grace, and leave no more room for a painter's genius than if he had been employed to copy an Indian idol, completely composed of bands and necklaces. a pale Roman nose, a head of hair loaded with crowns, and powdered with diamonds, a stiff ruff, a vaster fardingale, and a bushel of pearls, are the features by which everybody knows at once the pictures of Elizabeth. It is observable that her majesty thought enormity of dress a royal prerogative, for, in 1579, an order was made in the Star Chamber, that no person should use or wear excessive long cloaks, as of late be used, and before 2 years past hath not been used in this realm, no persons to wear such great ruffs about their necks, to be left off such monstrous undecent attiring. In her father's reign, who dictated everything from religion to fashions, he made an act prohibiting the use of cloth of gold, silver or tinsel, satin, silk, or cloth mixed with gold, any sable fur, velvet, embroidery in gowns or outermost garments, except for persons of distinction, dukes, marquises, earls, or gentlemen and knights that had £250 per annum. This act was renewed second of Elizabeth. No one who had less than £100 per annum was to wear satin or damask or fur of conies, none not worth £20 per annum, or £200 capital, to wear any fur, save lamb, nor cloth above 10s. the yard. The record of presents made by Elizabeth to the ladies of her court is scanty, especially at the early part of her reign, but in a curious manuscript wardrobe book of that queen, in the possession of Sir Thomas Phillips, Baronet, appears this item: Delivered the 30th of April, Anno Quatuor Regina Elizabeth, to the Lady Wodehouse, one loose gown of black velvet, embroidered overwarth, and cut between the borders with a lozenge cut, lined with sarcenet and fustian, and edged with luzarns, and one French kirtle of purple satin, raised, lined with purple taffeta belonging to the late Queen Mary. Section 12.